It's a tough topic to talk about. It's hoarding. And why it's so tough, I think, is because we live at a time where there's been a lot of TV shows about hoarding, and so we've seen lots of different homes where there's been hoarding and people that have moved in to clean up after a person's died. And the common response has been, "That's disgusting. How could anybody live like this?" And there's a whole bunch of shame attached to it. There's a whole bunch of judgment attached to it. It's a stigma. And so for the world that I work with lots of people who have had struggles with hoarding, who are hoarders, and they feel that stigma. They feel that shame and judgment, and it's embarrassing to them. And so for them to talk about it is something that's very hard to do because of the response they're going to get. And so I want this talk today to be one free of judgment. Because what I want to do is to help people realize that, is there a connection between hoarding and complex trauma? Is hoarding actually a symptom of deeper problems of childhood trauma issues? And I think the research over the last 10 years is showing very clearly that there is a strong connection between complex trauma and hoarding. And so the goal of this talk is to give hope that there is a path forward in dealing with this hoarding issue that points to how to heal the deeper problems so that the hoarding begins to get taken care of. So I really hope that this is not a source of any sense of feeling shame or judgment, but a means of hope for you. So let me begin with a very basic definition that is used for hoarding. And so it's the persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions, regardless of their actual value. So they might be absolutely worthless, but you just still can't get rid of them. And so this difficulty is due to a perceived need to save the items. So something says, I can't throw anything out, or it's due to the perceived need to avoid the distress associated with discarding them. So getting rid of them would just cause too much emotional pain or angst that you just can't bring yourself to throw them out. So that's the basic definition, but let me add some pieces to that. And it's the consequences that begin to happen as people hoard. And so the difficulty in discarding possessions results in an accumulation of possessions that begin to congest and clutter active living areas and substantially compromise their intended use. So you begin to fill up rooms and hallways, and it makes it harder to live in your house. More than that, though, hoarding then causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social. So you're afraid to have friends over. You're embarrassed about your house. And so you don't want to go out socially or have anybody visit. It affects your occupation. It affects other important areas of functioning in daily life, from your own personal safety and health, and also even the effect on others that it could have. And so, in other words, what we're saying is that I think what causes the shame and the stigma around hoarding is everybody can see the negative consequences. It begins to affect every area of life negatively. Physically, your safety, it affects all your relationships, it affects your mental health, your psychological, your social, your occupation. It's just one negative thing after another slowly accumulates. But the person feels trapped. They can't throw stuff out, and so they don't know a way out of this. And that's, to me, the pain for people who are hoarders. Now, as this has all been studied, they begin to realize there's different types of hoarders. So there's what we call animal hoarders, and that's the lady that collects the 50 cats. There's mail hoarders that people just can't throw out anything they receive in the mail. It just has to be saved. There's compulsive collectors. So you find a bobblehead, you find stamps, you find rocks, you find whatever captures your interest and you start to collect it, and then you just can't get rid of it even though it might be useless. Then there's compulsive shoppers, and that's the person who always is needing to go buy something to feel better. And they're especially attracted to stuff that's on sale, or if they get something that's 2 for 1, or half price, it's just like, wow, they just can't stop themselves from shopping, which then means you're accumulating stuff. And then you get people who hoard food. They can't throw food out, and so they just keep adding more and more food, leftovers, or they stock up on certain items of food and they can't throw it out. And then you get garbage hoarders, and people that just can't throw out garbage for fear that they might need it someday. And so now you've got garbage, and some of it has rotting stuff in it, and so that becomes a health issue. And then information hoarders, and that's the person who collects newspapers and magazines and pamphlets and flyers and anything that has information about what's going on. They just can't throw it out. And then hiding hoarders, and what we mean by that is the person who initially when they hoard, they don't want people to know they're hoarding, so they hide the stuff that they're hoarding. And that becomes a compulsion, is to try to hide everything so nobody else realizes that you're hoarding. So those are 8 different types of hoarders that we've been able to kind of categorize. Some of the statistics, this is interesting, is hoarding occurs in 2 to 6% of children and adults during their lifetime. So it's a very small percentage of the population. The average age of onset is in late childhood or early adolescence. So they begin to see the first signs of hoarding in children. In late childhood, early teen years is when you start to see early onset. The other thing that's interesting is they don't see any difference in the gender. So men, women do it the same. But what they do see is there often is a connection to mental health issues co-occurring. So you could have the hoarding disorder, but what they have found is that 70% of people with hoarding disorder have major depressive disorder. So depression is connected to hoarding. 25% have anxiety issues. So anxiety is connected to hoarding. 30% have social anxiety or ADHD type issues. So again, anxiety issues. So depression, anxiety, and then about 20% obsessive compulsive disorder. So again, we're going to come back to this a bit later, but there's a definite connection between hoarding and mental health issues. But here's where I want us to focus. About 50% of the time, the onset is preceded by a chronic or acute stressful or traumatic life event. So what caused them to start hoarding in the first place? A very stressful time or a traumatic event in their life. And I want to take that even further to look at the fact that complex trauma, where you have an ongoing state of neglect, loss, stress, that can accumulate and cause a person to begin hoarding. So basically beyond just 50% from a one-time traumatic event, I think it could be higher once you bring in complex. Again, in trying to understand and make sense of all of this, what they have found is they've now categorized 5 stages of hoarding. So it begins with level 1, which isn't really an issue, but it's kind of the messy person who has a cluttered house. That could be just their personality, could be a bunch of different issues, but this is the lowest level. It's some people might turn their nose up a little bit, but it's not causing problems. But there's messy clutter. But that's where it starts. Then you go to the level 2, and now people who come to visit begin to notice, wow, this person's got a lot of this object here. Like, why are there so many magazines or newspapers stacked over here? And so the person now starts to feel a little bit of embarrassment when they have friends over, because friends are noticing that this isn't normal, something's off. And then the third level, so it's growing as the person hoards more and more, is people start to notice there's some odors happening here. Ooh, this place smells funny. Or the hallways are narrow. There's stuff being stacked in hallways now, and you gotta kind of have to go down sideways down the hallway. So that begins to be the next. Then the next level is structural damage in the house, sewage issues, unusable rooms. So the house is now being affected by this, and it's no longer a home. It's no longer a safe place to live. And then the final one, the ultimate one, is the house is now very unsafe. It's a fire hazard. There could be running water. There could be human feces that aren't being picked up. There could be no electricity, all of that. So it's gradually building to greater and greater severity and danger. So those are the 5 stages of hoarding. One of the things that most people ask is, am I a hoarder? I know I'm kind of messy. I have a bit of clutter in my house, but does that make me a hoarder? And so they've come up with tests to help people ascertain if they're a hoarder or not. So one of the ones that I think is really a good one is called the Clutter Image Rating Scale. And you can go online and do this. And basically they show you 9 pictures of 3 different rooms. So 9 pictures of the kitchen, 9 pictures of the bedroom, 9 pictures of the living room. Each picture, so picture 1 starts with a clean room, then each picture has a bit more clutter, until it's just very obvious hoarding. And so it's a gradual, picture by picture, that you see increased amount of clutter and hoarding. If you get to picture 4 and that's you, and anything beyond that, then you would be considered to have problems with hoarding. So let me just give you, so let's begin. The first one is the living room, a little wee living room. So you can see picture 1, the couch, TV, lamp on the table, very neat. Picture 2, a little bit of clutter. Picture 3, yeah, it's getting worse. Then picture 4, you're, yeah, okay, I start to see what they're meaning now. We got some problems here. Picture 5, etc. Till you get picture 9, and the living room is basically not usable. So that I find is so helpful, because then you can compare your state of your living room to those 9 pictures. And then the second one is of the bedroom, and it's the same idea. Clean little bedroom. Each picture you get more and more till picture 4 you begin to go, okay, there's some problems here. So again, you go online and do that. It's just a very helpful test in order to see kind of where you're at. The next thing they've done, and so helpful, is they've tried to give the characteristics of somebody who's a hoarder. So what's going on in their head, what's going on in their emotions, what kind of behaviors do they do. So let me just take you through those, because I think it's, again, very helpful. So let's start with their thinking and their rationalization. And so one of the things that might happen in a hoarder is to go, I can't throw this out because it might be important and I might need it next year or the year after that. Or, oh, I love this so much, it makes me feel so safe and secure. I need to have this to feel the safety and security. Or, Dad said I should not be wasteful, and Dad drilled that into me, and I can't be wasteful. Or, nobody else in my family cares about wasting stuff. It's my responsibility to ensure that this gets used so it's not wasted, because I can't trust the rest of my family. Or to throw stuff out, I might in a year or two realize I made a mistake, and I can't fail. Failure is wrong. Failure makes me a bad person. I can't make mistakes. So it is so important for me then that I don't throw anything out just to avoid making mistakes. Or, I've just become so attached to this. It's become part of who I am. I just can't get rid of it. So that's some of the thinking that goes on in the mind of a hoarder. But then let's look at the emotions that are taking place as a person is hoarding. So you're going to find a lot of anxiety, worry, fear about these possessions, that anything happens to them, fear about what others are thinking, fear about maybe some of the unhealthy conditions that are developing. So lots of emotional stuff going on. But there's also loss and grief stuff. And I'm going to come back to this, but I can't throw anything out because I lose it. And I grieve that. And so there's very much a grief component. But then there's confusion that begins to develop. Like, I can't get rid of this. This is so important to me. But by hanging on to all this stuff, my house is not safe, and it's becoming a health hazard. And I'm conflicted inside. I want to keep it, but I think I should throw it out, but I don't know what to do, and it's confusing. And then for some, there's excitement and anticipation of, there's a sale on. I'm going to go and buy this stuff that's half price. And there's all the excitement and the dopamine rush that comes out of that. And then when a person actually does go and buy it, it's just like it's high. It's like, oh, wow, this is so exciting. I just bought this stuff. And they just have this rush of good feelings and even a relief that happens when they actually purchase something. But then there's shame and guilt. Like, my house is a mess. I'm embarrassed to have people over. My house stinks. I don't want to go out anymore. I lie to my friends about why I can't go out or why they can't come over. So shame and guilt. Then frustration and anger. They can't find stuff. They can't find their keys. They can't find that piece of mail that they need. Then they're bumping into stuff all the time, and they can't get into the bedroom. And it's just growing frustration. So what I want you to see is that all of those emotions are negative, painful emotions that are accumulating. Some of the behaviors that happen is that they save not just functional stuff, and they acquire not just functional stuff, but it's the non-functional stuff that has no value and that they really never will use again. So many hoarders, they'll start saving used paper towels and used tissues or empty bottles or containers, candy wrappers, old magazines, broken toys, old unimportant school papers, rocks and leaves and other things they find in nature they will save. So that begins to happen. And then they spend a lot of time searching for stuff that they've misplaced. So where did I put my keys? Where is that bill that I'm supposed to pay it? Because their house has got so much stuff, they can no longer find these things. And so a lot of time is spent looking for stuff. And again, of course, difficulty discarding anything. And all of that begins to result in poor concentration. They have trouble concentrating on stuff because they got all of these things to keep track of. Where did I put that? There's a sale here. What am I going to do with this? All of that. And then initially, they had trouble making decisions about keeping and throwing something out. That was the main decision that caused them trouble. But that begins to spread. And pretty soon they can't make decisions at all about hardly anything. They just are paralyzed in decision-making process. So the difficulty in making decisions just grows into all parts of their life. So let me just give you this self-test and see how you do. So do you have difficulty getting rid of items? Question 1. Number 2, do you have a large amount of clutter in your office, at home, in your car, or in other places like storage units that makes it difficult to use your furniture or appliances or move around easily? 3, do you often lose important items like money or bills in the clutter? Number 4, do you feel overwhelmed by the volume of possessions that have taken over the house or your workspace? So it's like these things are just taking over my house. Question 5, do you find it difficulty to stop taking free items such as advertising flyers or sugar packets from restaurants? 6, do you buy things because they are a bargain or you need to stock up? 7, do you avoid inviting family or friends into your home due to shame or embarrassment? And 8, do you refuse to let people into your home to make repairs? So those are 8 very important questions that you can use as a self-test. So again, I do this, hopefully not, some of you might feel some shame and all of that starting to come up. But I don't want you to stay there, and that's not why we're doing this. It's just to identify whether this might be an issue, but it's a symptom. And that's where I want to go now, as to what is the root issue? How does complex trauma play into this? So there's 5 different components of complex trauma that they have found are very much connected to hoarding. So the first one is attachment issues. So we have seen over and over again that from birth, the strongest drive in the little baby is to attach to mom and dad. And basically it is, I can't survive on my own. My only hope of survival is if I attach to somebody who will care for me and meet my needs. And so attachment is something we are driven to do. But the tragedy of complex trauma is that the child does not attach securely. So they try to attach to mom and dad, but mom and dad are too busy, they have their own problems, are angry, aren't safe. And so they form insecure attachments with their parents. But the key thing is we're still driven to try to find secure attachment. And so a child will do one of 2 things, or both. Number 1, they will begin to try to attach to unsafe people over and over again and keep getting hurt. Or they will go, let's stop attaching to people. Let's attach to things. Let's attach to activities. Let's attach to drugs. So they will find an attachment to something else. And so some people form attachments with things. Let's attach to possessions. And what is interesting is when you attach to things or activities, they give the same feelings of secure attachment. So what feelings do secure attachment give? They give, I feel loved, I feel safe, I feel warm inside, I feel secure, I feel that my life is stable. What happens when you attach to possessions? You feel safe, you feel security, you feel stability, you might feel good, all of the same things, but it doesn't last because it's not the right kind of attachment. But that is what happens for people who don't form secure attachment with a healthy, safe human being, is some end up trying to attach to possessions to get all the same feelings from that. So let me read you this. Early anxious attachments can lead to the avoidance of human interaction and the replacement of human relationships with objects. Individuals with hoarding disorder often have excessive emotional reactivity, and negative emotions can be slow to decline in response to interpersonal stress events. So when you don't attach, now when you're around humans, it can trigger you all kinds of ways, and you don't get over that very quickly. So it's easier just to have a relationship with things, not with people. One study, 197 non-clinical women completed 2 self-report questionnaires on attachment and hoarding behaviors. The results show a link between insecure attachment and hoarding. Preoccupied and fearful attachments are characterized by a fear of loss and abandonment. Possession and accumulation of objects and hoarding could help insecure people to deal with these fears. Therefore, insecure attachment appears to be a vulnerability factor in the development of hoarding behaviors. So again, people attach to things because it gives the feelings of security. It takes away some of the fear of loss and abandonment. And that takes us to the second issue, abandonment issues. So if a child goes, everybody that's human that I've tried to attach to has abandoned me, that's the worst feeling in the world. That makes me feel like I'm totally useless, I'm unlovable. It is so painful, but it also creates a great big fear. I never want to be abandoned again. So what do some people do? Okay, then don't try to attach to people because they probably will abandon you. They might not, they might, but you don't want to risk that. So just attach to things. Things won't abandon you. And so the way to deal with your fear of attachment is attach to things. They will never abandon you, but that means you can't throw them out because then that would feel like they are abandoning you. So again, possessions become their solution to avoid this deep wound of the fear of abandonment. And therefore, possessions give them that sense of security. Somebody's here for me, or something's here for me that won't leave me. But it makes it so it's hard to let go. There's a third factor, and that is loss. Now, this has various levels to it. So let me explain. Again, many people who grew up with complex trauma have experienced more loss than normal. And so because of that, they never want to experience that loss again. And so if they were to throw something out that was important to them, that would feel like a loss. And so they hang on to it, they hang on to it. And that can grow where they just can't throw anything out because it would feel like a loss. So again, some research. Some research believe hoarding can relate to childhood experiences of losing things, not owning things, of people not caring for you. This might include experiences like money worries or living in poverty in childhood, having your belongings taken or thrown away by someone. So this would be somebody bigger than you, mom or dad, throwing stuff away. You don't need this anymore. You don't need this anymore. And then you experience a loss that you didn't choose, or you grew up in poverty and you just never had it. So now when you get something, you don't want to lose it because you know the pain of not having it. Now let's go the next step. Individuals who have experienced natural disasters such as hurricanes, floods, or fires may also develop hoarding as a result. They may feel a strong need to keep everything they have left as a reminder of what they have lost. Individuals who have experienced trauma as adults, such as a serious accident or medical diagnosis, may also develop hoarding as a way to cope. They may feel a strong need to keep everything as a reminder of what they have been through to keep their loved ones close. So if you've lost stuff through natural disasters, through hurricanes, or you lost it through some traumatic event, then you go, I need to keep this other stuff to remind me of what I lost. And so you just can't now throw out anything because you need the memorabilia to help you remember the trauma so you never lose sight of that loss. Then we go to another layer. Traumatic events such as the death of a loved one or divorce or other major life changes can lead to hoarding. Hoarding can start as a way of coping with these events, as the individual may feel a strong emotional attachment to their possessions and may view them as a way to hold on to memories or feelings of security. So this would be, you go through a divorce, or your spouse dies, your child dies, and you now have all of your reminders, your keepsakes that remind you of that loved one. And that helps you cope, just to be able to look at, well, that was their teddy bear that they loved so much. And you develop a strong emotional attachment to those things because it connects you back to what you lost. And so you can now not throw that out. Take it a little bit further. After losing the love or life of someone close, it may be difficult to get rid of things that serve as memories. Their inability to let go traps them in a compulsive mindset, and their life as a hoarder begins. So what happened? You kept that teddy bear. That was good. That was fine. But it gave you that sense of connection, that sense of security. That changes your mindset. So now you get something else that's not connected to anything you lost, but you get some of that feeling of connection and security from it as well. So that begins that compulsive mindset that things lead to security, to connection. So that's loss. Now the fourth one, emptiness and emotional pain. So what happens with complex trauma, and we've talked about it over and over again, is a child has all of these painful emotions and unmet needs that they can't resolve. They try to tell mom and dad, but they're being neglected or abused, so these needs aren't being met. They're getting all this emotional pain. They can't fix it, so the only solution for them is to disconnect from their emotions, to shut down emotionally, to dissociate. Who needs emotions? Emotions are bad. What happens with that is you may not feel painful emotions, but you feel empty. You feel dead. You don't feel emotions. And that feels blah. We don't like feeling blah. That feels very discontent. That feels constant dissatisfaction because we're not feeling the pleasure, the joy. And so what people then begin to do is look for ways to solve the feelings of emptiness, to solve any emotional pain that might come up in their life. So it's not just emptiness. Now, I got to get rid of that emotional pain. So they find different things. So drugs, whatever. But some people find buying things. So I just bought a new pair of shoes. That just felt so good. Acquiring that, you get a dopamine rush. And what happens? The emptiness is gone for a little while. You feel alive for a little while. Life feels full of pleasure for a little while. And so that's where people then become compulsive shoppers. Every time the emptiness kind of begins to surface in the subconscious to the conscious level, the brain goes, I got to get rid of that. Let's go buy something. And that can start a shopping addiction. Trying to create pleasure, get rid of the emptiness, but it always requires buying new things, and that, for many, can lead to hoarding. The fifth one is false guilt. That can come out of the whole concept of wasting. So a lot of people that I work with, they either grew up in poverty, or they had parents who grew up in poverty or came out of World War II where they just had nothing. And what you had to do in poverty or coming out of war is you had to make do. You didn't throw anything out. All food that wasn't eaten, that put it away and you ate it as leftovers. Clothes got repurposed. Wood got repurposed. If you found a screw or a nail, it got saved because you might need it later on. Nothing got wasted. And that often became a value of great importance for people coming out of poverty or the war, which they then passed on to their children. And so you weren't allowed to throw anything out. You had to eat everything on your plate. And so you then, if you tried to throw something out, were shamed, punished, given a long rant from your parents about wasting. And so you had a conscience that was trained that throwing anything out is wasting, is wrong, is sin, whatever. That's a false guilt. Because sometimes it's healthy to throw things out. But now what happens is every time you go to throw something out, you feel guilt, but then you also start to feel anxiety. Oh, am I doing something wrong? Oh, if Dad found this out, and it creates all of this negative emotional stuff. So I hope what you see when you look at attachment, fear of abandonment, loss, emptiness, false guilt, I hope what you begin to see is all of those are very painful emotions. And so hoarding is really an attempt to manage painful emotions. And it's kind of on two different levels. So one is you're avoiding painful emotions like the fear of abandonment, like loss, like insecurity from lack of attachment, depression, emptiness. So you avoid it by getting things, by keeping things. But then there's a second level to that, and that is if you were to throw things out, that would create painful emotions, false guilt, anxiety, insecurity. So now you can't throw stuff out because it would add more painful emotions. But you get trapped. By hanging on to them, it begins to increase painful emotions, embarrassment, shame, guilt, frustration. And so now you start this cycle. You keep buying things to try to manage those painful emotions, which end up creating more painful emotions, and around it goes. So another way to look at this then is that hoarding is a temporary fix for pain in the limbic brain. It is trying to quickly fix the limbic brain that's feeling discomfort by buying something, hanging onto something, not throwing something out. It's a short-term solution that ends up creating long-term negative consequences. That's the bottom line with hoarding. And so let me just tie in hoarding and OCD, because OCD is a person who does certain activities or thoughts. So they count, they touch stuff, they wash their hands so many times, they turn off the light so many times, compulsively, they obsess about stuff. It's the same idea. They're trying to handle the discomfort in their limbic brain by going through rituals. And first few times they do it, they turn the light off 3 times, and that caused their fear to go away. So they begin to go, okay, next time I do the light 3 times, my fear went away. And they keep doing that, but pretty soon, oh, I didn't do it 3 times. Oh, now it gets worse because I gotta do it. So now it becomes a prison. So that's sadly what happens with OCD, but it's an attempt to use certain rituals to control my limbic brain. It seems to work, but eventually doesn't work. The same is true with hoarding. So having said all of that, I hope that just gives you an understanding of what those deeper issues are. But I hope it helps you begin to realize the path forward. So the path forward is not to beat yourself up. The path forward is not just to try to start with, okay, I got to get up my willpower and force myself somehow to clean my house. Probably isn't going to happen. So what are some helpful tools that help you if you have some hoarding issues? I hope you begin to realize you got to face those deep, complex trauma issues, mainly attachment, abandonment, loss issues. That's where I would encourage you to take a course like our LIVE program, our REACT program, that really begins to help you understand and deal with those deep core issues that come out of trauma. You're going to see that it's going to be painful to go there, but once you go there and start to heal, that pain quickly begins to go away, and you begin to deal with that core stuff. And that's where you got to start. But then the second piece is now you have the challenge of life today. And so you are going to get triggered when you go to throw something up. It's going to trigger your limbic brain and fear and all of those things we talked about. And so what you begin to realize is that dealing with hoarding in present day life to get over it and heal from it and change it is going to be a battle between your limbic brain and your cortex. That's what's really going on. Your limbic brain is being triggered and saying, no, I can't throw it out. Your cortex is saying, no, I need to throw it out. It's healthy to throw it out. And your limbic brain is fighting that. So they have found DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, quite helpful in handling this battle in the brain. But that's really what begins where the battle is taking place as you begin to try to change. And again, we talk a lot about that in our LIFT program. But understand that when the limbic brain gets triggered, it dysregulates. So you have to regulate it and get back to your cortex and then act on your cortex, even though your limbic brain is screaming and complaining. And the more you act from your cortex and do what you know is healthy, then the limbic brain is gradually going to start settling down and healing. But that's the first months of dealing with it, and that's the toughest time. But the longer you do it, the easier it gets. The final thing that I want to say is this: get support. I doubt that many people would say, okay, I'm going to begin to deal with these issues and I'm going to stop this hoarding and clean up my place all by myself. I just don't think that many would succeed if they tried to do that. So a big part of healing and growing in this area is we need help. And it's okay to ask for help. It is so difficult to do it alone. I hope that helps. I hope, again, my real heart desire is that this takes away some of the stigma. This takes away some of the shame. This helps you begin to realize, wow, this thing, this hoarding thing, that's a symptom of some deep stuff, and I can deal with that. I can get help for that. And then you have hope. Well, thanks for being here. That's the end of our evening. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.
Okay, well, welcome back. We've been doing a little bit on helping people as they deconstruct their faith and then try to reconstruct their faith. And we've been talking about some of the stuff that people hear in their churches that just sound so true, but they don't realize it's got a whole bunch of unspoken assumptions as part of it that often aren't true. And so one of the big things for many people is beginning the process of learning to distinguish the true parts from the untrue assumptions. And what we saw is that the guiding principle has always in the Bible been test every belief against the golden rule. Love others as you love yourself. Treat others the way you want to be treated. And so if you have an interpretation that ends up with somebody being treated differently than you, as less than you, then it's the wrong interpretation. And so I just want to do two things today. The first is take Galatians chapter 3, verse 28. And it's really, to me, Paul's attempt at trying to speak to some of the doctrines that were developing and were assumed to be right and soon to be good, but they violated the treat others the way you want to be treated. So in his mind, these are wrong, but these people seem to have proof from the Bible that seems to support their view, but it violates the golden rule. And so in Galatians 3:28, he comes up with this summary statement. It says, there is no longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female. So he's got three different categories: Jew, Gentile, slave free, male, female. Now that was significant in that culture, but let me take it to kind of a bigger picture of how does shame, if it's not dealt with in the individual, what happens next? It then colors how a family operates. And then if it's still not dealt with, it then spreads and takes over a culture, and you have a shame-based culture. And what happens with shame is I feel less than, I don't like that, I want to feel good about myself, and the best way I know how to do it is to feel better than others. And so it usually results in a superior-inferior approach to life. I have to find a way to feel superior to others in order to feel good about myself. And so what are the three most common ways people have done that? Let's make a distinction around race. Jew, Gentile. Black, white, Asian, Latino. And then let's basically say I'm superior to these other races. And then gender, male, female. That's been a big thing to say men have all these rights, women don't, a patriarchy system. And then the third is status, money, and power. I have this much money, I have this kind of job. That makes me superior to you. So those were the three main ways of creating superiority in that culture. They still are today. Sadly, is that many people, without realizing shame is driving their thinking, it's making them want to end up feeling superior. What they don't realize, it makes them end up wanting a theology that supports that actually supports their shame. And you can go to the Bible and come up with verses that seem to support that race distinction, that seem to support that status distinction, gender distinction. And that's why Paul says, no. Each one of those violates the golden rule. Therefore, the way to approach life, if you want to think in love terms, if you want to carry out the golden rule, is there's no longer race distinctions. There's no longer status, slave or free distinctions. There's no longer male or female gender distinctions. Get rid of that thinking. And then you're going to be able to carry out the golden rule. Second thing I just wanted to say to people who are in this deconstruction process is it can be a very difficult journey, very confusing journey. You can find yourself second-guessing yourself all the time. So let me just give you an example that I hope will help you. What many people realize when they are starting to deconstruct their faith is that they grew up being taught about Jesus and being told that this is the true Jesus. And as a child you believe that. But now you come to your faith and you're deconstructing it and you begin to realize the picture I was given of Jesus isn't entirely true. There's true parts to it, but there's some distorted stuff. There was some stuff that was emphasized, some stuff that wasn't emphasized. There was misrepresentation. And so the Jesus that I was handed as a child, I don't any longer believe is the true Jesus. I believe I was actually given a false Jesus. Now my journey is to find out the true Jesus. To pursue finding and getting to know the true Jesus. That's what deconstruction and reconstruction looks like. But what happens? All your friends are still following what you now see as a false Jesus. You're wanting to follow what you see as the true Jesus. How do they perceive you? They perceive you as abandoning Jesus because you're abandoning their Jesus. They see you as being a heretic, as abandoning the faith. They see you as wandering from God, backsliding. And so what I want you to understand is that in order to follow the true Jesus, you have to leave the false Jesus. And that is not going to be perceived well by people. They're thinking you're abandoning Jesus totally, which you are not. And so, you must abandon a false Jesus if you're going to follow a true Jesus. And that is a wonderful journey, but it brings with it a whole bunch of opposition and misunderstanding.